The introduction of the clones ushered in a new era for the Republic military. These clones were advertised as identical, genetically engineered super soldiers, and, for the most part, Kamino delivered on that promise. Except, in some of the most important ways, they didn't. Clones were supposed to be, well, clones. Men identical in every possible way, with the appropriate modifications to make them the best soldiers out there. At the beginning of the war, that looked like exactly what the Republic had gotten, but as time passed, it turns out that the clones were certainly many things, but identical was not one of them. In today's video, we'll be delving into clone individuality and trying to distinguish what was part of their template and what was uniquely them.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
As you can tell by the name, the clone troopers were literal clones. When the Kaminoans were ready for the mass production of the clone army, they used Jango Fett's genetic sequence, modified to ease out some of the less desirable traits and to promote certain others they wanted the clones to have. The clones were tall, strong, healthy, and bred for warfare. The results of the cloning process was that the vast majority of the clones were genetically identical, excluding anomalies like Clone Force 99, which were altered intentionally. All the rest started life from the exact same starting points. Although it's debatable how much of a role genetics play in personality and behavior, sources clearly state that the Kaminoans modified the clones to be less defiant than Fett. They wanted their super soldiers to obey orders blindly and to foster strong senses of community, loyalty, and camaraderie, which are all traits most of the clone army displayed. What the Kaminoans couldn't program into the clones at the genetic level, they made up for with rigorous and very standardized clone nurturing. From the moment they were born, all clones were raised equal in equal ways. They lived together in the cloning facilities on Kamino. They shared rooms, had identical schedules, and were provided with the same basic gear. Clones wore the same uniform and were made to keep their hair a certain way, ate the same meals, took the same training exercises, the list goes on. Young clones had no opportunity to make choices for themselves or express their own preferences. At the same time, they were heavily conditioned through training and military education on how to think and act. Virtues like teamwork, obedience, and trust were drilled into them, and looking at the adult clones we encountered during the Clone Wars and the Bad Batch, the Kaminoans did an excellent job. In the war between nature and nurture, the Kaminoans decided to play both sides. Despite their best efforts to raise completely identical dolls, however, clones still manifested unique traits. In the Clone Wars Season 2, Episode 20, a young Boba Fett infiltrated a unit of young clones and trained with them while undercover. During the episode, we witnessed what young clones' daily lives were like, down to the identical haircuts. But even in such a structured environment, the clones all had distinct personalities. Already, they had picked out codenames for themselves and showed signs of unique strengths and weaknesses. Not all clones were equally skilled at everything, despite being genetically identical, and from this episode, it's obvious their unique skill sets manifested early. The Kaminoans did their best to stamp out any signs of individualism, but the moment the Jedi became involved, any chance of that happening flew right out the airlock. The moment clones were shipped off Kamino for the first time and entered into full service in the Grand Army of the Republic, the countdown began. Their entire lives up until that point had been stringently controlled to allow for as little deviation as possible. But the moment the clones were no longer under the Kaminoans' direct control, their conditioning began to crack. Two factors primarily contributed to the clones expressing themselves more freely. To start with, the Jedi played a huge role in encouraging the clones to be themselves. Most Jedi found their cardboard cutout personalities and mannerisms creepy and directly encouraged the clones under their command to let loose a little. Clone codenames also helped. With names that actually expressed their individual quirks or talents, clones immediately felt more like real people than droids coming off an assembly line. It also encouraged them to embrace said quirks and talents, which set each clone apart from the others in their own unique way. The second factor that heavily influenced the clones was simply being free of their Kaminoan overlords. The thing about unnatural conditioning, like personality suppression, is that once you're able to step away from it, it begins wearing off. When the clones integrated into the GAR and lived in barracks, interacting with other soldiers, civilians, Jedi, and politicians, they were exposed to a far greater spectrum of people than they had ever been before. Even in the beginning of the war, when clones had almost no rights, including no right to entertainment, the opportunity alone to mingle with different people and cultures ate away at their conditioning and allowed them to be more human. Later on, when clones were allowed to do things like mingle with the public and drink at bars, they were able to discover things like their favorite booze or favorite game. All in all, the war gave the clones the chance to be human, which is exactly the opposite of what wars usually do. That just goes to show how brutal the Kaminoans' hold on them had been. The war took them from droids to people, and it's thanks to it that we got the amazing clones we did. So, what did the clones all have in common, and in which ways were they unique? While it's impossible to draw a distinct line, we can definitely make some distinctions. At heart, almost all clones were loyal, brave warriors. They cared for one another and for the Republic they fought for. They weren't afraid of dying for the cause or to protect each other and civilians. They did what they had to, from suicide missions to bombing runs, and they didn't flinch at the atrocities they saw. They were incredibly strict when it came to following orders and protocol, and took disloyalty and betrayal personally, especially when it came from people they should have been able to trust, like their commanders. At the same time, each clone took this basic template and added to it, like a pasta dish customized with thousands of sauces and toppings. They had distinct senses of humor, even if they were all prone to the same type of barracks humor soldiers often have. They had their code names, and we would argue that the units they served in also expressed their personalities and skills. Although some clones were able to choose the squad they served on, like Echo, most were assigned to different divisions and specialized units based on their skills. Each unit then had unique armor markings, different types of equipment, and styles. Commanders in the clone army were also able to customize their armor to distinguish them from lower ranked soldiers, but that doesn't mean other units didn't do the same. Who doesn't remember the 501st's gesture in painting their helmets orange and white to honor Ahsoka? Other units painted unique marks on their armors too, and it was a way of setting themselves apart in a sea of identical faces. During the war, clones were also allowed to modify their appearance depending on their preferences. Some clones chose to get tattoos or change their haircut. All other styles had to be military appropriate, but we see a variety of styles on show from more prominent clones, from Captain Rex's bald head to Cody's short Chad haircut to Hunter's long hair. Personality-wise, each clone also developed a completely distinct set of traits and quirks. Rex, for example, was awkward at times, but a loyal and steadfast character that could think quickly on his feet and take command. Tech was quieter and preferred to follow than to lead. Wolf was a little crazy, Jesse was sarcastic. However, alongside the good comes the bad. The clones' ability to be themselves allowed a few clones to turn rotten. Clones like Commander Fox or Commander Thaya expressed themselves fully, as evil, uncompromising people who didn't care whom they hurt along the way. But that brings us to our final and most important point. The clones had a choice. We talked about how they were almost all loyal, obedient, and brave warriors, but that doesn't mean that it was so deeply ingrained in them that they couldn't act otherwise. We have plenty of evidence of clones going rogue, like Slick. Some of these clones choose to go bad, which must mean that the rest of the clones chose to stay good. They chose loyalty and bravery and sacrifice, and continued to do it every day for a Republic and galaxy that never cared about them. And if that isn't a true show of character, we don't know what is. And there you have it. The Kaminoans did the best they could to produce an army of human droids, but even they failed in the end. Which clone was your favorite in the series, and why? Was Slick actually right in the end, despite his despicable deeds? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.